So this is my last day as ESA President, and with having achieved this major milestone, I've been thinking about what else I could do in my career to be working really hard and not getting paid anything for it. So there were two obvious choices: stand-up comedian or lay preacher. Now, I'm not religious, but all churches have equity policies these days, so it should be okay. If you recall my talk last year, I did adopt the pulpit-pounding preacher persona. And you may also have noticed that it made the babies cry and scared the PhD students in the room. So I'm going to try to restrain from the preaching persona today as much as possible. On the other hand, I have had some really positive and eloquent feedback in the comments to my articles in The Conversation, telling me how funny I am. So I'm going to take this positive feedback and see where we get to today. So today I will be talking about the results of the Academic Freedom Survey that we ran last summer. We had 220 respondents, self-selected people, pretty well representing the diversity of members across the society and in ecology across Australia. I want to start by talking about workplaces. So can everybody just, if you work in a university, can you just put your hands up? Everybody in the, now keep your hands up. If you work in industry like an NGO or mining industry or consultancy, just put your hands up as well. Now, if you're retired, just put your hands up. Okay, now keep your hands up. Thanks. So just have a look around. So everybody now with their hands down, we've secretly found out that these people probably work for government. Now, so everybody who put their hands up, so just turn to those people with their hands down and give them a bit of good cheer, say, good on you, say, keep it up, buddy. And maybe offer them some lip balm for their mouths, because these are the people who wear the gag tighter and more often than anybody else in the room, but not by much. So here we see this is the proportion of government respondents to our survey who have constraints on public commentary. It's nearly everybody, who are the 3% who think they haven't got constraints on commentary. Industry not far behind though at 82%, and university respondents at 38%. The interesting part though is that 61% of government respondents thought that current constraints on communication are excessive. That's twice as many as for industry and twice as many again from university respondents. We're going to see a lot of these graphs today. These are from a multinomial GLM, and they represent the proportion of respondents who thought particular things. So one of the first things we asked in our survey was, well, what really do you think is the role of scientists in public communication? And that's laid out here. Let me see if I can laser this. So virtually nobody thought scientists have no role in public communication, and pretty well nobody thought that scientists could maybe choose to present factual information occasionally. Jumping up to over a quarter of respondents thought it was a duty for scientists to provide at least factual information. The most popular response was scientists could choose to participate in public debate and advocacy. But a third of people thought that it's actually a duty to participate in public debate and advocacy. Now, the ESA presidential position doesn't come with any dictatorial powers. Sorry about that, Beck. Because if it did, I would have made everyone do this 3 years ago. But there's potential for norms to be influential. And I'm not saying norms are always influential when ecologists are in the field. But if norms are influential, in fact, nearly everybody thinks that scientists have at least a duty to provide factual information. So most people think scientists should be involved, and it's just coincidental that this speech bubble looks a bit like a redacted Freedom of Information request from an Environment Department. So most people think scientists should contribute, but what's the reality? So this is, we can see government had, 34% of respondents suggested that government they said that they had had their work unduly modified by their organisation. 30% of industry, but only 5% of universities. Over here, 52% of government people reported having their work prohibited, 38% from industry, only 9% from university. So you've got to ask the obvious question here. What is wrong with these university communication policies? I mean, you can't go, why should 90% of university staff be able to go around never having their work suppressed? They could be saying whatever they want based on evidence and within their field of expertise. It's a recipe for chaos. So I'm going to talk a bit about consistent messaging, which obviously you'll never get from university areas. But first, I've got some random numbers. Now, these random numbers are inspired from reading The Guardian. You know, you read The Guardian and halfway down the column there'll be this giant number which seems out of context, but then they'll have a bit of text just explaining what it is. Of course, if you work for government, you wouldn't know that, because since the High Court decision last year, you all have to read the same newspaper as the minister, and that's not The Guardian. 62, this is the number of text responses we got from our government responders. 50% of those thought that the constraints on communication within government were reasonable. And the most common reason they gave for that was that it provided a way of making messaging consistent within the organisation. 23 is actually just a random number, which get rid of that. Now I have got some helpers, some anonymous helpers to help talk about some of the actual personal responses that we got to the survey, and this is the first one.
If everyone started speaking on behalf of the organisation, we would get out of the way, Don, I can't see. We would contradict each other constantly.
So that's a perfectly reasonable perspective, right? I mean, you can't have people from a government department coming out with, you know, statements like this. You know, government scientists say logging forest is a threat to possum. And the next thing you'll hear somebody saying, new government study finds possum needs tree hollows and logging is destroying them faster than they can reform. On the other hand, you know, someone could say, 20-year government survey finds widespread decline of possum caused by habitat loss in forestry operations. And finally, you know, the minister will chime in and he'll say he wants the possum off the critically endangered list so logging can proceed, securing 10 million regional forestry jobs. Clearly, there's a major problem with consistent messaging here. It's chaotic. And the solution is obviously to gag these evidence-based perspectives and just smile and nod while the minister makes the call. Okay, there's some, thank you for that down the back. So I said 62 was the number of responses we got from government. The other half of our government respondents thought that the constraints were unreasonable, and 52% of those were aggrieved because they felt they were gagged in a personal capacity, and the High Court confirmed that that is actually true.
An email was circulated to our whole department warning us not to attend protests or comment publicly on the development.
23% is the percentage that were aggrieved because they think the public remains uninformed.
We are often forbidden from talking about the true impacts, especially if the government is doing little to mitigate the threat. In this way, the public often remains in the dark about the true state and trends of many species.
So it's one thing to fill in an anonymous survey. It's another to think that you should be able to speak in a personal capacity outside of your workplace, and even worse, to think that the public should be informed. I mean, these ideas, they're un-Australian. In fact, they're certifiable. This is a well-known... Oh, I've just pressed the wrong button. They're certifiable, and because it's well known as the Delusional Democracy Syndrome, otherwise known as the DDs. These ideas are so un-Australian that although this was an anonymous survey, we have taken the IP addresses of the people who expressed this opinion and sent that to Peter Dutton's office, and they will receive a call from the Re-Education Office in due course. So we want to know what types of communication are suppressed. And this summarises it. So what I've done here is just add up the number of respondents who said their work had been modified or prohibited. And so you can see here that the most commonly reported area of suppression is traditional media, so op-eds and that sort of thing, followed by social media. Coming down to the bottom, peer-reviewed journal articles and conference presentations are also suppressed, but less often, and I talked a bit about that last year in regard to feral horses in New South Wales. But perhaps initially surprising is this middle one here. So a whole bunch of people reported that internal documents were being modified or prohibited. And I say, initially you might think that's surprising because, you know, when you think deeply about it, it's really, we should really expect that, right? I mean, you can't expect your manager and their manager and their manager and their manager and their manager and the CEO or the minister or whoever's at the top of the heap. You can't expect all those people to understand your evidence-based point of view. I mean, you can't go sending these people your cutting-edge research results with sharply pointed interpretations. It might burst their bubble. So, funny, I thought that was the funniest joke, and I ran that past my family at home, and they didn't laugh either. It's like, whatever. So a whole range of topics are suppressed. These poor delusional democracy syndrome people have a whole lot of topics suppressed. What are they? So it's threatened species, it's clearing native vegetation, it's mining, it's urban development. And you can see here that in all these cases, industry respondents gave reported this most often. So what we've got is a whole bunch of biodiversity being compromised in these areas, and essentially people can't talk about it, particularly from industry. It's not just these topics, it's feral animals, it's logging, it's climate change. And notice here that particularly government was reported being suppressed in the areas of logging and climate change. So we've got this whole suite of major threatening processes. We've got and the species that are most vulnerable to those threats, all having information suppressed and swept under the carpet so that it's hidden from view. I mean, this is absolutely just... I'm just doing jokes today. It's actually not that bad. Everything is okay because there is a whole set of green topics that no one reported as being suppressed. These are all the go zones. So these green topics include things like green tape, green armies, greenbacks, green wash, and even burning greens. No, too far, that's right. So we wanted to know what are some of the factors that influence people to tie the gag around their own mouth. So what influences what constrains their public commentary. And it really all boils down to fear. Guts churning, body shaking, fetal positioning fear. And there are three kinds of fear. The three M's of fear: media, money, and masters. Let's have a look at these. So fear of the media. So people reported being afraid of being drawn beyond their expertise. They were worried about how the media would represent them, and they had a certain amount of expertise uncertainty. And notice that these issues were most commonly reported by our university respondents because they haven't really got much else to be particularly scared of. Fear of you losing money, losing your livelihoods, losing your job. These are serious issues. So 38% of government, 32% of industry, and even 22% of universities were afraid of losing their job if they spoke out in areas that they're knowledgeable based on evidence. Fear of losing research funding, most common among university respondents. And also fear of promotion, common across all workplaces.
I've seen develop a secretive self-censorship approach by many companies for fear of losing work or losing employment. And the third M is fear of masters. So here we've got
People are afraid of the minister's office, senior management, middle management, and workplace policy. And this is really sending us a very strong message. And I need everybody's help to help you understand what this message is. So can everybody just put their hands up with their palm facing themselves? I just need a bit of engagement here. Thanks. So everybody just start like this. Now we're going to make this graph. So just fold this little finger down and this ring finger down to, now you can't see where I'm going, can you? And then fold down your thumb and your other finger to make the university. And so you can see this really is sending a very strong message to the science and general community.
Government staff are awarded or penalised on the basis of complying with opinions of senior staff regardless of evidence.
Consequences of communication constraints. There aren't consequences, are there? I mean, besides being offended by rude gestures. Science is just one of the things that go into policy. There's a whole range of other things, like you've got to consider the social outcomes and economic outcomes and whether the minister can sell the policy using discriminatory rhetoric. A whole bunch of things to consider. And if science drops off, who would really notice? Well, our respondents thought there were some serious consequences. So if policy is being written without the actual data that was collected to produce it being used to inform it, policymakers are uninformed and public debate is also uninformed. So what's new? Public uninformed, policymakers uninformed. This all circles back to this delusional democracy syndrome and three key rhetorical questions. Why should voters know what politicians have done and will do to the environment? Why should there be informed commentary on development and policy proposals? And thirdly, does it matter if environmental policy isn't properly informed? A question well represented by the cane toad. So, consequences of communication constraints. This is a lovely alliteration, and it reminded me of a few years back I was promoting the Hot Topics, and I represented that as the 3 C's of Hot Topics. Anybody remember the 3 C's of Hot Topics? It was 7 years ago, so I'll forgive you. Create a hot topic, contribute to a hot topic, and communicate a hot topic. Obviously, we have to change the 3 C's of hot topics in this new suppressed environment. The new 3 C's of hot topics are, first, you have to be coerced to write a hot topic by the hot topic editor. Well, nothing's really changed there. Second one, collaborate so you don't have to use your name on the authorship list. And thirdly, cop the crap because your master will hunt you down anyway. Which leads me to the other consequences, quite serious consequences. So you can see the proportions of people who reported personal suffering as a consequence of them actually speaking out. And similarly, job satisfaction has been affected as a consequence of communication constraints. 42 is probably a random number, not also the meaning of life, but also the percentage of respondents who've been harassed or criticised for their communication. And get this, 83% of those said that the harassers were motivated by political or economic interests. So it is as bad as you thought. Here's some more numbers. 77, this is the number of written responses about consequences of communication constraints. 54% reported a decline in motivation to contribute to their workplace objectives.
I became disenchanted with the organisation I work for, and as a result I've been less inclined and motivated to dedicate myself to my job. A
real message there for managers as a trade-off between protecting your minister and having a workforce that actually wants to work for you. 18% is the proportion of people reporting suppression had caused job insecurity or loss.
I declared the redacted unsafe to proceed. I was overruled and very bad things happened. I was told to be silent or never have a job again.
I did edit that one a little to help protect the person who said that. And 19% is the proportion that indicated they suffered deteriorating mental health.
I would say it severely compromised the mental health of myself and another member of the team and was a large contributor to both of us leaving. So, like an off-track bushwalk that you weren't quite prepared for,
This is pretty soul-destroying. But also, like an off-track bushwalk, you take up your compass and you chart a way forwards. So the direction from here. So the Academic Freedom Working Group has come up with a list of recommended reactions and responses to this that need to happen. And I've, apologies to the rest of the working group, I have sort of summarised these in a way that some people may find inaccurate. But anyway, first, these are we recommend adopting ethical codes of practice that respect democracy. We recommend codes of conduct that support open reporting of factual information. We recommend media training. We think it's important to recognise that harassment and suppression of information is actually an OHS risk. We want to see transparency and accountability in industry. We want to make people who suppress science walk on hot coals until they cry and repent. Oh, that one's actually not from the working group. That's really from the El Presidente's dictatorial handbook. And it has to go away. So we want to see academic freedom policies enforced in universities. And there's stuff that professional societies like the ESA can do, including lobbying for open and timely sharing of science, monitoring science suppression, and supporting whistleblowers. And I'm just going to finish up by sending one message to each of those three workplaces. For universities, we want you to uphold academic freedom rigorously. For industry, we want you to demand open reporting and accountability. And for government, stop it or you'll go blind. That's the end.